This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Tamotu, MPR.
Kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations. This is a show about great trash, difficult art, and our complicated relationships with art and culture. My name's Hugh, I'm the host of the show, and I'd like to take this opportunity to put in a very mild content warning for the show as a whole. Sometimes our recommendations on this show are reserved just because the thing that we're discussing is in some way not good, but sometimes there are aspects of the art or artist that may be confronting for some people. Check the episode descriptions for more information, and do be aware of your listening environment. Kia ora. Good evening. You're listening to Manawatu People's Radio today, Irarangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. This is a radio show and podcast called Reserved Recommendations. We talk about difficult art, great trash and problematic faves. And this is not how we usually start episodes. Normally I just start talking straight away, but what we're listening to is a self-generative, self-modulating analog modular synthesizer patch by James Lissette, who is here to talk about like what it is and how it works and the things it does.
Thank you, Hugh. How are you?
I'm really good.
Cool.
The reason I got you on is because I've started playing around with the software environment that pretends to be the hardware thing that's sitting on a table making noises over there.
Yeah, VCV rack.
Yeah, that's the one.
It's awesome, eh?
It's really cool.
Yeah. Modular is you could say it's a bottomless pit, but it's this amazing source of creativity that comes in so many different formats. You can run it in VCV rack on your computer. You can spend money and build racks and do things. Yeah,
absolutely. And I guess like up front, the reservation about it is that it's one of these things where like the well of how deep you can get into it is basically bottomless. Like this is a way of making music and particularly electronic music where you can just kind of keep finding new weird shit to do forever.
Yeah. It's important. Probably parental warning: if you have an addictive personality, don't take up modular, or have therapy alongside it. Because it can be an endless bottomless pit of buying things and doing stuff and experimenting. There's a really good community in New Zealand which is based around NZ Modular, which is a Facebook group, and there's a lot of buying and selling and trading of modules. So certainly when I started out, about 10, 12 years ago, it was quite cheap. It's like buying cheap modules and learning things and what they do and how they work and do they suit you and things like that. And sometimes it can be a bit of a journey. I've certainly bought things and gone, oh my God, that's terrible. But other times I've bought things and I've just gone, oh, eureka moment. It's like it fits into this thing and this idea. But even the kind of things of like, like I've had modules, because a modular synth is made up of little components that you kind of all put together in a box and things like that. The things that are really, modules that can be quite difficult to understand and get to work, therein lies the challenge, because it's like suddenly you can hit this beauty spot with it. And I think it's always about learning and developing ideas and just kind of seeing where they go. And I've had my frustrations with it, but I've also had great moments of joy. And it's to me, it's something that I became aware of modular when I was about 12 years old, and I was pretty hooked from then. And it was really, since the emergence of kind of the modern day modular format that I've been able to get into it and do it.
So I guess as a starting point of how to think about it in some ways, it is very much a modern phenomenon, because you've got this phenomenon now where like modules will cross over from the VCV rack environment to the real world. Like there are people who've built software things and then people have gone, this is really cool, can we have it as an actual metal box, please? And that's happened. But it kind of goes back to the very roots of synthesizers and electronic music, right?
Yes. So if you sort of go right back to people like Stockhausen and things like that, and really sort of post-World War II, where there's all of this test equipment available, there's all of this old radio equipment available. So people were doing things like getting sine wave generators and filters and basically, creating music from there. And then it's really through the evolution of people like Bob Moog and Bulka, who kind of two different approaches too modular, but at the same time kind of sort of complementing each other. And in the modular world, there's like an East Coast, West Coast. So it's kind of before hip hop was East Coast, West Coast. Modular was like that. And you can sort of blend the two together. And Bob Moog certainly had all these great ideas, like the invention of the envelope. So you could shape a sound. That was before then. It's like, oh yeah, we could just do this thing, but you couldn't really shape a sound. And then you could make this instrument sound like violins and flutes and cellos and things like that. But it had always been that sort of degree of experimentation.
If people are completely detached from the world of synthesis, what an envelope does basically is it introduces like 4 stages to a sound. There's a stage or 4 stages to a process. There's a stage where it gets more intense. There's a stage where it drops off a little bit. There's a stage where it stays the same for a while, and there's a stage where it takes a while to fade away. And you can control how long all of those are, and you can also apply them to a sound, in which case you get like a wow kind of quality, or you can apply them to any other process and give it that kind of shape as well.
So it can become, all sorts of different things. A friend of mine makes a really good analogy about envelopes. He said it's like, going out and how much alcohol you drink on a night out. Like some people will just go hard and, it's all over. Other people will sort of build up slowly and then go rah, and other people just kind of cruise along and, don't do stuff. But certainly envelopes, and there's many different styles of them that work in different ways, allow you to generate. One of the most famous modules in modular is called Maths by Make Noise, which is essentially like an envelope function generator, and it's so much more than that, but it's so simply just that. And that's the kind of thing with modular. You can plug things in a different way. So you could buy a synthesizer. It's cool, and the software's great, and a controller keyboard, and you can do stuff. But with modular, it allows you to, you can plug things in back to front.
Yeah, well, so the thing that I've noticed is I got my start doing electronic music stuff in an environment called Buzz, which is like comes from Windows 3.1 era. And Buzz was a software emulation of a way of working called trackers. But there are lots of elements of it where it wasn't clear to me. Like I could figure out what a function did by context, by just like fiddling with a slider and seeing what happened. But it wasn't necessarily clear to me how that was working. And what I've found since getting into VCV Rack is that you can see all of those processes as they happen, and you could go, oh, right, this thing that was always confusing me is happening because it was probably controlled by this kind of a thing. And so it's a really interesting look into kind of like the building blocks of synthesis, but also, as you say, like some of the stuff that comes out of a synthesizer module is in the audio range that we can hear, and some of it isn't. But inside that environment, it's all just voltage. So you can kind of connect anything to anything else on that basis.
And that's primarily what it is. It's voltage. It's all based around voltage. It's a simple sort of concept, and that's really the whole thing of, if you boil it down to it, like Bob Moog was a sort of a mechanical electrical engineer. He wasn't really a musician, but it was the involvement of people like Herb Deutsch who were a musician. He's like, oh, go this, Bob, we could do this, and Bob was like, oh yeah, it's fine, but it's really just, plus and minus volts and how it works, and it's like a musical scale. Is you play a scale on a piano keyboard, it's volts, 1 volt per octave.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned a name there of someone who worked with Bob Moog. I do think it is really important, particularly when you talk about synthesizer music, to make sure that people know that there is like the precise reasons for it are obscure, but there is like a parallel gay and specifically trans history of synthesizers. Because the other person who was a major consultant with Moog was Wendy Carlos.
So, Walter / Wendy Carlos, for me, my favourite sort of Wendy Carlos album is the theme to Clockwork Orange, which is a masterpiece of electronic music. The film, it's up to you what you think of it, but and certainly there's all the Switched on Bach albums as well, which not particularly my kind of favourite of things, and in some ways, there's a side of arguments that said it kind of ruined modular because it was like a novelty thing, there's certainly a period of time you can go to the record fair and you can buy those albums, and they're also like the modular novelty albums, and
I had this thing called it was a double album but on one disc, because in the shift from LP to CD, the format length changed, and it was one album by a group called the Vulcans and another by Joe Kidd and the Pirates, I think. But anyway, it's instrumental tracks from Jamaican reggae with Moog lead overdubs and weird noises and things, because they were attempting to, like, I guess, simultaneously cash in on two crazes at once. It's really, like, some of it's quite good. Some of it's aggressively experimental in terms of the noises they make. But it's a fascinating artifact.
And Wendy Carlos, just to come back to that one, like, absolutely, like, Switched on Bach, home studio, one note at a time, 8-track recording, incredible. Like the work ethic, and working with Bob and developing the synthesizer as the album's progressing to be able to do this and do that, and can we create this? I need to be able to kind of try and get this sound. I want to get the flugelhorn a bit more like this, and it's actually really incredible. So it's this masterpiece of kind of doing stuff, and I think there's a whole golden era of music around that time. Delia Derbyshire, BBC Radio Workshops. Absolutely,
that was the other name I was going to drop, because she's just fascinating, like musician, but also just an approach to sound. Like anything that was around the office became a potential source that she could turn into something interesting,
And that's really, like that music concrete. And like I have another sort of modular rig, which is more like what we're hearing in the background is this kind of East Coast rig doing its generative thing. And I have a West Coast rig, which is more about making music concrete and cut up stuff, which once upon a time you'd do with reel-to-reel tape loops and things like that. But now, my choice is I do it in modular, and that was a journey in itself to arrive at a collection of items that could get what was in my head and into a reality. And at times that was an incredibly frustrating process. This will be cool. Stupid thing. What's wrong with you?
That is the other pitfall that I've found, is the number of times that I have rage deleted an entire VCV rack patch because I've gone down a hole, and at the bottom of the hole there is nothing good.
And to me it's also the parallel is with guitar players is like you buy this having played a lot of guitar, you buy this pedal, you think, this is wicked, it's cool, and it's like, seems the shop's cool, and you get out, you put it on stage and you lean on it and you turn into a cabbage, and it's like, what the hell?
Look, absolutely, and like for an example in the guitar world, there's a really specific pedal sound that I absolutely loved, which was tied to the sort of slightly more operatic end of 90s rock, people like the Smashing Pumpkins,
right?
Which was all about the Big Muff pedal. But of course, the thing that I didn't realise until I had bought a Big Muff and messed around with it and found it kind of underwhelming, and then seen some interviews with Billy Corgan, the guitarist in question, what he was doing like 8 overdubs of the same guitar part, and every time he set the tone control on the Big Muff to another point that made this weird little interesting spike. And he just did that over and over again until he had this enormous wall of sound, which is great, but you can't do that in the moment.
No, and it's like, so it's quite funny, but I think modules are like pedals, and it's there's people I really admire, there's amazing pedal collections and what they do to kind of create, like people who do things just with pedals. It's like, it's incredible, that sort of, it doesn't sound like a guitar anymore, but it's like, whoa, and that has sort of educated me in modular as well. It's like, okay, I don't want it to sound like that. I want it to do this thing, and so you got to learn how to kind of get to that point. And that's where they again come back into the New Zealand modular group, and anybody who's thinking about getting into modular, I recommend joining the New Zealand modular group, because it's a really good thing, because it's like, hey, I want to do this, and people will go, well, there's this and there's this, and that's like how I arrived with the Veslic performance sequencer. It's in this rig, which is sequencing everything, because somebody said, look, really, that's it. And then I saw this video and I went, oh yeah, that's the moment. I need one of those, and I have two now. So yeah.
The thing that was a real game changer for me in terms of playing around with things in the software environment, but I'm sure you can do it in the hardware environment as well, because a lot of these things have parallels, was the idea that you could introduce what were essentially like logic chains to sonic chains. So I've been messing around with a patch that has a little hi-hat going, and like I can set up a link of logic so that every beat it's got a 50% chance that it'll instead be an open hat, and then that open hat has a 50% chance of also being a snare instead. But like that was revelatory for me, because I understand lots of bits of music, but not really drumming. So I have to find ways to introduce something more interesting than just kind of like a really robotic drum machine sounding rhythm.
Yeah. It's and it's I'm the same. Recently we saw Kraftwerk when they came to New Zealand, and man, it's still has always been this moment for me. An interesting, little modular rack tucked away somewhere on the side of the stage, don't know what it's doing, but but the drums are all made with synthesizers and shaping those sounds and everything, and that entire rig over there could be used to just make a kick drum. And it's like, it's a funny thing, it's like you just make this one kick drum. I tend to just find good samples, and things like that.
But I mean, if you listen to those kind of iconic early drum machine sounds, which did become iconic, right? And then people started doing things like getting 808s and tuning the kick drum so that it becomes like essentially a bass note. And the reason you can do that is because they were applying an envelope to some sort of a waveform. They weren't sampling a kick drum. They were going, boo, and then putting an envelope so it becomes bloop, and then changing the pitch.
And just to touch on that, like the 808 and the 303 is an amazing combination, but it was aimed at guitarists for them to have a band in their bedroom to practice with, and it wasn't until a bunch of cool guys in America sort of went, hey, we could do this, and there's house and electro, and it just the whole world changes.
Look, I think that's a point that I really want to pick up on. It is around about the halfway point of the show, so we're going to stop for a quick break, and we'll be back right after this.
Support this show and others like it by giving a donation. For more information, go to www.mpr.nz/donate.
You're back on Reserved Recommendations. This is a radio show and podcast produced at Manawatu People's Radio with the support of New Zealand On Air, so cheers for that, guys. Today I'm talking to James Lissette about modular synth, and we are listening to his generative modular synth patch going on in the background. You hit a really interesting point right before the break. You were talking about how the 303 and the 808, which are both drum machines, like early drum machines, were originally intended in their like consumer niche for like guitarists who want like something slightly fancier than a metronome to jam with in their bedrooms. But then they got kind of adopted by people who found something really interesting in their kind of like weird artificial stock sounds and made really like impactful stuff out of that. And I think that's, in some ways, that's like a journey for all of synth music. Like there was a period where people were really trying to make synths sound like real things, and often recordings that use those kinds of sounds are either you can really peg them to an era, or they sound kind of bad because the fake trumpets never really sound like real trumpets or whatever. And it kind of really comes into its own when people go, okay, this is never going to be a trumpet, but what if I make an outer space trumpet and it becomes its own thing, you know?
Yeah. It was and we can come back to guitar videos about this as well. Landmark moment for me, and I named check them sort of like years ago, a Palmy band called Damask, and I can't remember the exact model of the keyboard, but it was a Casio keyboard, and I had one as well, and I saw them play, and this is around the same time that I first came to Palmy, and we bought a sound company to Palmerston North in the early 90s, and this guy's, and I was like, wow, man, my keyboard doesn't sound that good, you know. It's like, and I went up and I said, man, how do you get it to sound like that? And he goes, it's a rat distortion pedal. And I'm like, oh yeah, there we go. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course you can plug it into a distortion pedal, you know, and it's
I saw this band in Dunedin, and they had, I don't know what it was, but it was one of those like little like 2-octave keyboards, like a tiny little thing. But it had an arpeggio function that they really liked. And so they had one song where they just got a big strip of gaffer and taped down one of the keys, so it would keep this arpeggio going for the whole song, and then they untaped the key at the end of the song with this big clunk. But like, you know, it's all about finding a thing that this bit of gear does that's useful to you or meaningful to you, you know?
And that's you know, like I used to have a huge collection of analog synths and drum machines and things like that, and they're incredible, but you sort of can do things with them, and it's an amazing kind of thing, and I do like it. But you also need a huge sort of area to store them in, and you need to conduct a certain amount of budget towards maintenance, because I've certainly had lots of cool things just go poof and make magic smoke, and this is the bit where I bless Alistair Ferguson, St. Ali, he's put up with me for years, because I still do own devices that are very archaic, and he's just kept them living and going, and he's only ever pronounced death over a couple of things, but I live in hope of finding another one so I can fix the other one. So, you know, this is the thing for me about modular, and even like vintage modulars, and having been fortunate to play on vintage modular machines like EMSs and things like that, is the incredible scope of what you can do within that environment and do stuff.
Well, that's right, because everything that we are listening to, that little like hi-hat sound is a sample, but everything else is a controlled waveform of some sort.
So it's all coming from oscillators, it's all sort of manipulated and generated in one ways. The little whistling sound is white noise running into a filter which is verging on feedback, and the feedback is being control voltage, so it's pitching. It's kind of like these little knocks, and I sort of go gate knocks from LPGs and things.
And the same thing can have different functions in different applications, right? So like a low frequency oscillator could be used to either make a low tone, or it could be used to make something go up and down. And that thing that goes up and down could be like the pitch of a filter, or it could be the chance of a particular thing happening, because some things have probability knobs and you could control those back and forth. Like all of this stuff is controllable by other elements.
And it's kind of like it's like it's running itself. This is the thing, you can set it all through things like VCAs. There's a great saying in modular synth that you can never have enough VCAs, and it's quite true, because you can modulate the modulation, and you can create this sort of great in-depth kind of thing. It's it can just sort of journey into the void itself. One of the things for me is that if I don't play with the patch for a while, I might just leave it, and I don't, it's for some reasons. Sometimes I'll come back to it, I'll turn it on, and I'm like, oh, what the hell's going on? And it's like why is it doing that? There's a lot of cables, and you're looking at it, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, did I plug that into that? Why's that doing that?
And I mean, the thing that used to happen back when I was doing things in Buzz is that you would be working away on something, and then you would shut it down and go have a sleep and come back. And sometimes a particular loop or something would need to run for like 5 to 10 minutes, because I would be using delays or something, and what I'd been hearing and enjoying hearing had been I don't know what happened to the sound there. Let me just fiddle with the I think this is all my dodgy connector here. There we go.
I put another 20 cents in too. So
the glimpse behind the curtain is that all of the sound out of James's exceptionally expensive and clever rig is reliant on one female to female mini jack connector to get into my system.
You can never have enough adapters.
And it's either the connector or one of the two cables plugged into it is not quite in the state it should be. So every so often I have to jiggle it to make it keep behaving. What I was saying is, like, what I'd been hearing and enjoying was something that was the result of like a certain amount of sound having built up in feedbacks of delays or something like that had to be like already happening in order to put enough pressure through the system to make things react the way I expected them to.
And that's what analog synthesizers are like. It's wicked, and you turn it off and you turn it back on and you go, oh, what happened? And then it warms up, and then it might come back again. And it's why it's always important to have the tape running, or the computer recording, or whatever it is you use, because that again for sampling, it's like there's that moment, it's wicked. And I often like for me modular's a lot like when I played a lot of freeform music with the Fusion Refugees, if people might remember them, and the Mechanicians, and that was it's like we don't even tune, and you play the guitar, here's a trumpet, and it's this fantastic idea of creating this kind of free, but it is like this moment where suddenly, and I've had this thing, like we'd be jamming out and I'd be like, man, who's this band? Oh, it's us, and then everybody just it just disintegrates into something else, and the first time I ever played with the Fusions was live, and playing synths with them, and I'm like, I have no idea what these guys are doing. They're changing key every sort of couple of minutes, and it's like, and then I thought, I'll play something, and they all just hooked onto me, and I'm like, oh, what the hell, and sort of like some ways, like with the random thing with modular, it's like that. It's like you started, like this whole thing started with making the little whistle sound, and I'm like, and the way that my brain works, like I walk through the shopping mall, it's like a tune in my head, I'm outside, I'm at work, walking around the corridors and that, and I it's all like this music in my head, and I don't know what it is in my brain. It's always been that way. It's like this thing, and I sometimes I do zone out, because it's just tuned into a song. And as a little aside there, I've tried this thing of like walking around and going, oh yeah, and I record it, so I have a little field recorder, and I record it and I listen back to it and I go, oh no, that was just my imagination. So, but now one of the great things for me, how modular works for me, is that I can make something like that whistle, and then I know what the next bit is. but I've got to create it. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to create it, but I know this thing I'm looking for to go with it, and then it just sort of flows on from there. And I have made things which have just been 2 sounds, but with modulation and, again, shifting control voltage and stuff. There's this variation in there. It's very simple and open, and it's that kind of thing. And I have a little philosophy that all good ideas happen by accident. But it's also really important to know when to stop.
Yeah. Because you can endlessly expand things past the point where the initial idea was good. Yeah, and I when I used to make a lot of beats and that. One of the best lessons I learned was well, the reason why you think it's shit is because you've sat here listening to it for 4 hours and haven't been outside, and it's just ingrained into you. And it's like, stop. Don't do it for more than X amount of time. Stop. Walk away from it. Come back to it fresh. Your ears are tired. You're tired. All of that kind of thing. Because I think there's been a lot of times where it's like, it's shocking. And you play it to someone and they go, oh, dude, that's amazing. And it's like, because you've listened to it 50,000 times. And absolutely. And I think, that's a really useful lesson for all creative stuff, because I've definitely, I've got into a loop on the guitar. I've got this little run and it sounds cool. I can't work out where to go next. I'm just going to play it 500 times in a row, and now it sounds bad to me. I haven't changed it. It's still the same thing it was. Someone else would probably think it was cool. I've just hammered it into the ground.
And it's like, oh man. So it's that thing about understanding its freshness and that. And one of the things I'll say is what's like modular in that, I'm greatly admire people who make music and they might have, say, one device. And for me, years and years ago, I had this little Korg mono preset synthesizer that was missing 3 keys, and a 4-track tape deck. And I never played this stuff to anybody really, but I'd sit there in my room and just, again, guitar pedals, and just make these little tapes and things like that. And, that simplistic kind of ideas is kind of like minimalism kind of thing, it's important, that kind of space and time. And for me with modular, it's like you can put breath into it. That's the thing I think that I've sort of discovered with control voltage and that idea of gates and envelopes and that, is that you can make it breathe and move. And certainly, like, you guys helped us out with one of the projection shows, and people might remember some of the projection shows we've done around the city, where we got to do the cathedral and Maple Lane and that kind of thing. Like doing that live, interacting with the video guys and them interacting with us, and that ability to be able to just kind of pull all these different elements. That was just amazing. It was like an incredible sort of series that we did.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, one of the things that's been happening that people won't necessarily have picked up on is that every so often you've been dashing over and like fiddling with a knob or two because something's not quite behaving the way that you want it to. But like that ability to I guess try and modify things to fit a particular mood, or and do that in real time, it's really powerful. It's really cool.
I thought something that I haven't done, and I think it does require adult supervision. I reckon it'd be really good to set up a modular patch, like in a public space, and then just let people play with the knobs and see what happens. It's kind of like, it'd be quite interesting, because another cool thing is approaching somebody else's modular rig. And it's like how they, this is the thing with modular, I'd say, is that everybody's approach is different. And even if somebody has the same kind of more or less exactly the same rig, what they approach and do with it is kind of usually completely different to you. And that's it. There are people I know who limit themselves to only having, a small amount of modules in a small box, and their output is amazing. It's what they do, because they kind of go, I don't want to end up, making these huge big things. And admittedly, this rig's gotten quite large, but it's purposefully done that because it allows me a scope to do a lot of things that I want to do. But my other rigs are quite small and concise.
And I mean, partly because I pitched this to you as we were going to talk over this and leave it to play itself in the background. This is like quite floaty and ambient, but you can make like aggressive dance music or like you can put in all of these different elements because you can make everything react in whatever way you want. James is just adding some distortion and weirdness.
So you just while you said that, Hugh, so I've now, because it's running into a sort of a Roland distortion unit, so distorted it, but I've also changed the sample rate of the output, so it becomes this really glitchy kind of grimy thing. Excuse me, which again, harking back to sampling, that sort of the golden age of samplers that were really low bit rates and things like that. So there's this element of when they were sampling like 808 machines and stuff, or sampling of records. This grit and grime. So that's
and like one of the iconic like early techno kick drum sounds is actually digital distortion, which is one of the things that you're supposed to really avoid in the digital realm. But it's someone deliberately pushing the gain on the channel for the kick drum, the synthesized kick drum higher than it'll go, and you get this really like crunchy, nasty distortion.
I love that stuff. It's like it just. And I have a collection of devices purely for the thing of like you can create that grit and that sound and that kind of thing. And it's sort of something that I've tuned into quite a lot is that you can take something that you've made but then turn it into something else. It's really interesting. And then there's one of the cool things with modular is like you can go to this place. And but then it's like how you can come back to where you started from. So you can end up right in the void, but then you can pull it back into this kind of thing about being what it was before. And that's sort of it's I don't know, it's a real joy in that. I found myself really lost in it. And again, it's like playing live, doing that kind of thing. It's like that big experimentation. I mean, putting myself right out there was a few years ago with you guys was doing a live to air in the library and starting out with the modular completely unpatched.
Yeah, and so it just kind of built up as it went along.
I'm just shitting myself. I'm just like, what am I going to do?
But also like you shitting yourself, because we videoed that one. People can go and watch that. What you shitting yourself looks like in that case is like perfect Zen-like calm, because you're just kind of like locked into the mode of, okay, well, I connect this thing to this thing, and now that's doing this. Okay, so we can do this to this, and now it's doing this. We just let that happen, and we can do another thing. And just like watching that process happen kind of inside your head is fascinating.
And there's a definite point in there where it's actually like it's doing something, but I have no idea why it's doing why it's doing it. What did I do that made it do that? And I'm like, if I turn this... Well, oh no! It's like, oops.
Maybe if I, oh no!
It's like, oh dear,
Well, thank you very much for coming and having this conversation, James. It has been a lot of fun. I hope people have enjoyed the synth burbling away to itself in the background. I like to finish the show by doing two things. The first is to ask you if you have any things that you would recommend. So you mentioned like the modular synth forums, which cover people in the software environment as well as hardware environment, like it's for both of those. But are there people who you think are like doing really interesting stuff? Is there anything else you'd recommend people check out?
I would definitely go. I'm lost for names. Certainly. No, actually, I can't think off the top of my head. But yeah, definitely. There's people out there who are really amazing.
What I would say, if people want to do what I did, and
I'll get my phone.
While James gets his phone, if people want to do what I did and come via the software space first, the advantage of that is that you can do a lot of stuff for free. I mean, you're subject to whatever the limitations of your computer are, but you can do a lot of stuff for free.
Yeah.
And there's a channel on YouTube called Red Means Recording, who has done like a 4 video, each video is about half an hour, so it's like 2 hours in total, like really basic intro to the principles of Eurorack using VCV Rack as an example.
Yeah.
And that is great as just like looking at a blank patch and going, what the hell am I doing? Starting point as a way to explore from there.
Yeah. I'd recommend Sarah Bella Reid for like the VCV Rack thing, learning about that kind of stuff. Certainly on Instagram, check out my good friend Rob, who's Mortal 3. So Mortal 3, all in one word. He's incredible what he's doing in terms of modular, and he recently created this piece which is just like New Zealand bush, it's just incredible. His music is really good, and I'm also going to go. Hang on. One of my favourite noisy people, and he won't mind me saying that he's noisy, is Modern Chair. So on Facebook, check out Modern Chair. Is just really, really cool. I'm sort of pretty vague. I can't really think of anything.
No, that's fair enough. The other thing that I generally ask people is, like, do you have anything that you want people to check out at the moment?
Me?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, you were for a while playing like out around town with the local modular synthesizer enthusiasts.
Yeah.
But not so much at the moment.
Yeah. So we did a gig in May, thanks to Palmy Bid. And that was me and Sean. We played, which Jeff Carr organised, and that was really cool. I really enjoyed that night. That was my first time playing in a pub, in a bar for I don't know, like a million years. It was kind of fun. But yeah, I've got some things planned. We're kind of looking at and stuff like that. I am endlessly recording an album, which I'll get round to actually doing and finishing one day. But I've got to admit, I tend to, and it might sound sort of very art wanky, but I tend to kind of make music for myself at the moment. Mm-hmm. It's like my out from everything. I really like. Well, just doing it at home, and
particularly with modular synth, it really is a thing where you can kind of plug yourself in and start messing around with sounds, and then just be sitting in a sonic landscape for an hour quite happily.
I'd certainly I want to sort of install myself in some art galleries and things like that, and sort of spaces. There's a kind of a thing that I've been exploring a lot about, just kind of responding to a space. Again, I'm just being an art wanker here, because I do tend to think it's more about, my music's more about like art than things. I mean, I think the label alternative is just this terrible thing now, which is describes this mainstream kind of.
It's something that began to become meaningless as soon as it was applied.
Totally. And so I think, at the end of the day, you should always just make music just for yourself. And if other people dig it, that's fine. If you want to put it out there, that's fine. But if you want to just do it for yourself, it's fine. And there's a lot of people I know just make music for themselves. And I think that's the coolest thing. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, James.
Thank you for having me, Hugh. It's been fun.
You've been listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. The show was produced and presented by me, Hugh Dingwall, and I also composed our theme music. It's called Sack Jazz, and you can find it at wolfboy.bandcamp.com. If you enjoyed this show, why not go ahead and share it with a friend? You can find the last 10 episodes at mpr.nz/show/reserved or wherever else you get your podcasts. If you want an episode older than that, try searching for Reserved Recommendations on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter at Objective Realty, or you can follow the show on Facebook. And finally, Manawatu People's Radio is a non-profit community access station. If you like this or any other piece of their fine audio programming, why not fling them $1 or $2? You can go to npr.nz/donate for more information on how to do that.